Well, welcome back to the Encounter Faith podcast. My name is Ross, and I'm sitting down with Elisabeth Lectka. Hello, friend.
Good morning.
I'm excited because today we are going to talk about Lent. As Elisabeth and I record this is recording on Mardi Gras, for those of you where that matters to something, or Fat Tuesday, I guess is what my wife would want me to call this. So we're about to enter into this church season of Lent. And to start things off, Elisabeth, really, really broadly, I came from a background in a non-denominational context, and I think it's very easy for folks who have stories like mine to go, oh yeah, I know that's a thing that the church does, but I don't have to change my routines or change my life, or it really doesn't really impact me. So to ask the most leading question I may have ever asked in the history of this podcast, why should people care about Lent?
Lent is meant to be a time of preparation. As I've been thinking about it and thinking about our conversation, I think what is beautiful about the church calendar that sometimes gets forgotten in non-denominational context, you just kind of go through the rhythm and each Sunday is the same thing. But one of the beauty of kind of liturgical churches that follow the church calendar is that you have seasons that remind you of the ups and downs of faith journey.
Sure.
So season of Lent is meant to be a sort of awareness of sin, awareness of the things that get in the way with our relationship with God, the dark and hard stuff of life in preparation for the truth of resurrection and Easter and redemption. And so we spend this season in the calendar year, in the church calendar, in order to prepare ourselves for the miracle and the promise of resurrection.
I'm curious how you teach that. You in your ministry context, you've had a lot of time with students, you've had a lot of time with adults, but one of the things I'm intrigued about is the idea that for me personally, this was something that I've had to live deeper and deeper through my decade or so following Jesus, where I very much was just oh, right, now it's Easter, right?
Yeah.
Missed all of Lent.
Yeah.
And there's definitely been plenty of years where I've missed most of Lent, but it started with an increasing awareness. And my assumption would be you've been in situations where you've been actually able to explain this for people for the first time. Mm-hmm. What does it look like to help people understand the value of that preparation, particularly in a time where we're in that, whatever cliche you want to use, that microwave culture that we're expecting things to be instant?
Yeah. Here's an image that comes to mind. Going through everyday routine, and your wife Lauren leaves a gift on the counter for you. She made you gluten-free cinnamon rolls.
Nice.
And the surprise of that.
Yeah.
Oh man, wow. Lauren thought about me. That's a great gift.
Yeah.
Great gift, great story. But in comparison to, it's been a hard week. Everything has drained me. Every conversation has been hard. Baby didn't sleep through the night. I am in a deep place. It's rained every single day this week. Life seems to be falling apart. My friends aren't talking to me. And Lauren pays attention and sits down with you for an hour. And that hour is rejuvenating in a way because you needed it in a deep soul kind of way. Yeah, there's a difference between those two gifts. Yeah. And I think when we ignore the church calendar, it's the first one. Easter comes around and you're like, sweet, Jesus died for me. When you acknowledge and participate in the embodiment of the church calendar of Lent, you're entering into that darkness.
Yeah.
Part of Lent is choosing to be okay, I'm going to pay attention to these dark things, but it's more of acknowledging the fact that that darkness exists, whether or not we want to pay attention to it.
Yeah.
And then allowing Easter to shine light into that space in a way
really
that
good.
is deeper because we've acknowledged our need for Easter rather than just being surprised by the fact that it happened.
Yeah.
Both good things.
For sure.
But Lent gives us that invitation to say, okay, pay attention to what's hard.
Yeah.
Because Jesus has an answer for those hard things.
Yeah. Okay. So perfect segue into the next part of this, where I think right now, literally right now for a lot of people, there is this sense of things feel particularly hard. you talked about paying attention and like having to go there. I think the reality is right now, a lot of people feel like everywhere is there. Yeah. Like everywhere is dark.
Yeah.
And that's been continuing for a while. And that's, it's not a new thing, but I think the volume or the noise associated with things being wrong in the world and locally, for a lot of people, feels pretty overwhelming.
Yeah.
And as a result, I think a lot of folks and a lot of churches even are trying to make a church experience feel like an escape from that.
Yeah.
Right. That's part of the reason why, to really zoom out, like attractional church culture came up, where it was like, hey, like we're going to be the best hour of the week.
Yeah.
And the reality being like, wow, it's a great metaphor about the one-time present versus the ministry of presence, because it's like, yeah, that satisfies something, but it doesn't actually go deeper. Mm-hmm. How do we as a church, how do you think about this as a pastor, as a minister, like walking people through the value of acknowledging those hard things? Because I think for so many people, the quantity of hard things feels overwhelming.
Yeah. I think the thing about hard things and darkness and brokenness, it's like it's there whether or not we acknowledge it.
Sure.
And it affects us whether or not we acknowledge it. And so part of the work of walking with Jesus authentically is having the self-examination, the reflection, making the space to say, I'm going to pay attention to this hard thing, even though I don't want to, and I'm going to trust that Jesus is there with me.
Sure.
And we have plenty of things that can distract us from the hard stuff.
Yeah.
From the things around us that are causing us stress, that are causing us to feel hopeless. We have plenty of things that distract us from that.
Right.
But doom scrolling doesn't address the deep need.
Yeah.
And doesn't actually solve the problem of what's going on. Mm-hmm. We can only solve the problem when we pay attention to it. Mm-hmm. And that's part of what Lent invites us to do, is the self-examination, the self-reflection. And I think that's where having it as part of the church calendar in a way is a gift, because some years the self-reflection, it's all very internal. Like, it's like, this is my personal life and my personal struggle, and this is where I need God to speak to me. And there are other years, perhaps this is a year where you're looking at the whole world and going, whoa, God, where are you in this?
Right.
And Jesus has something to say for us, for the whole world too.
Sure.
That we might need to pay attention to. And so having it every year allows us to return time and time again and allow God to speak to us in new ways. Just like we return to a passage of scripture over and over, and some years it teaches us something new. The church calendar offers that space too, for us to return and say, same thing, feels familiar, but God's teaching me something new this time around.
So one of the curiosities for me to talk about personally, this is your first Lent where you and David, your parents now.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the things I'm curious about for you and your husband is, are there ways, and it's very okay if you guys haven't even had this conversation, because I should stress, like, you guys are new parents. Are there ways that you're thinking about this season differently now that you have this different perspective?
My first response is no, because I forgot that Lent starts right now.
Love that.
So, like, just kind of starting to wrap my mind around, like, oh yeah, yep, we're here.
Yep.
Lent is starting.
I do think that's why Lent is 40 days. Is because for a lot of years, it's actually 25 days.
Yeah. So, we're still in this sort of like, yeah, here we are.
For sure.
I think I should stress,
like, Elisabeth and David's daughter Alice is quite small.
She is 7 months.
Yeah. And for most folks, it's like, oh, right, like my child was 2 when I remembered how to do spiritual practices. So it is an unfair question for me.
I think I'm not even quite sure what season we're in right now.
Yeah. Yeah. You're just talking about the weather. You're not talking about the church calendar. Yeah.
Weather. But I think because Alice is so young, like, there isn't sort of that reflection of like, oh, how do I teach her?
Sure.
But there is still a space of like, oh, what patterns do I want to be developing so that Alice catches them?
Yeah.
Because part of what part of what I enjoy about liturgy and the church calendar and the way we embody some of these things and the colors that we use to decorate or things like that is like, we can catch that. That's shared passively in our families. And so I think about Lent and I go, oh yeah, what practices do I want to be doing as a parent that I am modeling for Alice and is for my relationship with Jesus? Like primarily
for your relationship with
Jesus, what do we need to be doing right now?
Right.
But what things do you want to be learning how to do as I'm parenting so that as Alice is watching in a year from now, is she going to just pay more attention to? Like, is she going to pick up her little Bible because I'm picking up my Bible? Like, what can I be doing now that's starting to do that? That's kind of the question that I've been
wild, by the way, just as someone who's only sees Alice every once in a while, like the idea of like, a year from now, she'll be like picking up a Bible. That's crazy. Okay.
Right. Well, she's 7 months old. It's like, yeah.
But one of the questions that brings up for me, you and I in this like broader young family demographic, like I find myself having these kinds of conversations a lot where there is both the like, I feel like I should be doing something, but I don't really know what the thing is. And the reason I don't know what the thing is because I have tinier versions of me that are constantly disrupting the things that I want to be doing.
Yeah.
And I also think, especially in the season that you and David are in right now, the thing you want to be doing the most is nothing with Alice. Like that intense level of connection and like stopping and the world slowing down with someone who can literally give you nothing back. Well, now she can give you smiles and a lot of cuteness, but like for a long time could give you essentially nothing back.
Yeah.
Is something that is, I think, incredibly unique for you. But what I'm curious about is like, as you're talking to other young families, or as you and Dave look at families that have gone before you guys, like what are some of those things that you hope that she winds up catching? Like what are some of those things that as you set some agenda, you're like, hey, this is something that we can be intentional about?
I think we've had some of these conversations before, and I think about like evening prayer. There were habits David and I had as we were like dating and engaged that now as new parents, it's like, oh yeah, remember when we used to do that together? How is your relationship with God doing? I haven't asked you that question in a while. Amazing. Like there is some of that where it's like,
the amount of half full couples devotional shelves that are on Lauren's book library.
That like, it would do us some good to pick some of that back up again of just the checking in about, it was almost a year ago now, we were like, hey, we should probably find a small group that we need to be a part of.
Sure.
We had never done that together. I hadn't been in a small group
since you were a student in high school.
Since I was in college, I think.
Okay.
And David had been in one that had kind of folded. And so we just like asked our friends and put together a small group. And we were like, hey, we all need to eat.
Yep.
So let's make this a dinner small group and we'll rotate who's hosting. And
that is probably the thing that I wish folks who weren't a part of the faith understood the most, is that so much of what we do as believers is centered around food.
I mean, we got home from vacation a few days ago, and the small group chat, like somebody was like, hey, this is what dinner is on Monday night. Like, see you guys there. Yeah. And I was like, honestly, I'm tired. Alice cried the entire flight home. I am absolutely wiped, but our fridge is empty, so we're coming. Like that's the reason we went to small group.
For sure.
Was because dinner was being made for us and we had people that would hold Alice while we ate. And so when I think of like, okay, what are we doing as a family? What are practices? How do we want to like teach and catch this? It's like, what are the question for David and I has always been, what are the ways we want to build our family that build these essentials of faith together? When you see the church gathering in Acts 2 and the things they're doing as the early church, well, they're eating and they're praying and they're reading the word and they're serving each other. Okay. So how are we serving together as a family? We're building in, this is a recent habit of building in one night a week where we gather with our friends who we have a difference of politics. We have a difference of backgrounds. We have a difference of amount of time following Jesus. And it's so good for all of us together. And we eat, and we read the word, and we catch up on life, and we pray together. Thinking about, evening prayers for David and I think about mornings that I know what I need right now as a parent. I need time to think about me because all I do is think about Alice.
Sure.
And I know the answer to getting that is I need to set my alarm about 45 minutes earlier than it is right now. And
for sure. Yeah.
Maybe that's what I'm doing for Lent this year is all right, God, 45 minutes earlier.
Yeah. The title of this podcast is Elisabeth Discovers Her Spiritual Practices for Lent 2025.
Yeah. Because it's I know what I want to be doing and I know what I need and have spent some time identifying that, but I'm going to actually do it.
Yeah. And listeners don't know this, but when you walked in, I was confessing to my wife, Lauren, that I have no idea what I want to be doing or not doing in context of Lent this year. But I think I'm really grateful that you're saying all this out loud, because I think part of, at least what Lent can do for me is the ability to embrace our faith where it is rather than where it should be. Mm-hmm. And I think especially in this young family place, we are constantly, fairly subconsciously, comparing ourselves to other families.
Yeah.
Comparing our kids to other kids, comparing our marriages to other marriages, comparing ourselves to other parents. And I heard somebody say once, you wear that parent identity as a young family a lot stronger, where I'm a parent of a small child. Mm-hmm. And then eventually you're just a parent. And that's just one of the many hats you wear because your child is more independent in theory. And I think it's really helpful for folks to hear this sense of we're just trying stuff and trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Even though for your case, there's a lot of understanding of why that's the case of having a 7-month-old that I think too often folks don't hear from the church. Mm. Too often folks are expected, they have this perception, I should say, that they're expected to come into an Ash Wednesday service knowing here's all of the things I'm going to do for the next 40 days. And I've already started doing half of them. Mm-hmm. And the reality that I think a lot of folks can embrace with Lent is going into the darkness is going into the brokenness of the world and how the brokenness of the world impacts us.
Yeah.
One of the things that makes me just sort of naturally ask about, though, is when you have, as you've looked back and had those kinds of questions, and you're talking about evening prayers as an example, one of the things that I think is hard for folks with a spiritual practice that simple is that they want to make it more complicated.
Yeah.
And so to use evening prayer as an example, or to use, because I'm using evening prayer as an example because sometimes the farthest distance between two lines is from your hand to the alarm clock to set it 45 minutes earlier.
Yeah.
So to use evening prayer as an example, what does it look like to feel man, the thing happened? We did the evening prayer versus, man, this was really valuable and beneficial to, I'm not sure if that one counted. What does that spectrum look like for you guys?
Habits are tricky.
Yeah.
Habits are tricky.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Because that's part of kind of brain science, psychology, things of that nature, identity development. Sometimes you have to do the thing before you really notice that it's taking any effect.
Sure.
Sometimes you have to tell yourself that you're a person who prays because you pray once a week.
Sure.
And you're I'm a person who prays.
Yes.
So I'm going to start by praying once a week.
Yeah. I like that.
That's kind of the dynamic around habits is in order for them to work, they need to align with your identity. And so if you think of yourself as somebody who does this thing, then just try to start doing that thing.
Right.
No matter how it is, no matter how it comes across. And sometimes that evening prayer might happen in the seconds you're going to bed. And sometimes it might happen at dinner. sometimes you might need an alarm for it because you need to be reminded because you just don't know what your night's going to look like.
Sure.
But if you think of yourself as somebody who does that thing, figure out a way to start putting that into your practice so that it becomes a daily habit.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's what I'm saying is sometimes it starts from an identity, like naming that identity as part of you and then making sure like, oh yeah, do my habits actually match there?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like, I want to be that type of person.
Sure.
And so I think in order to get there, maybe it just looks like starting really small.
Yeah.
And when I put my daughter to bed, I'm just going to pray for her.
Yeah.
In the rocking chair before I put her down.
Sure.
And that's going to be our habit. And I'm just going to say, hey, David, like bedtimes are mine. And then I'm locking that habit with something that I need to do anyway.
Yep.
Yeah, and so all of those things are kind of thoughts I have around habits. You kind of just have to, sometimes you kind of just have to start doing them.
Yeah.
And when you miss it, that's what grace is. That's
literally
grace.
That was going to be my next question, is because like we've made things so much harder on ourselves by both having this like expectation of our microwave culture that we were talking about earlier and an expectation of perfection. Yeah. And there's plenty of other podcasts or I'm sure books you could read that talk about why that's the case. I think it's okay for us to just declare that as a reality in this moment. When, when Alice gives you a hard time, or when you have something to do here at the church, or when David has something to do, or whenever life gets in the way, what does giving yourself grace look like while also holding some sense of accountability for you that you're going to go at it tomorrow?
I think, often this conversation comes up in Lent because we have this connection of like, oh, Lent means I'm going to give something up.
Sure.
Or Lent means I'm going to start this new habit. And we have that connection that has kind of developed, whether or not it's healthy, but it becomes something that we talk about this.
You can read some papers that Elisabeth read during seminary in order to figure that out. Yeah.
Church history and all of that. But I think like giving yourself grace is also a habit that has to be developed. You also need practice in that. It's not an automatic thing. Maybe it is for you. I don't know. For me, it's not. Like, I'm a recovering perfectionist and I will be recovering for my entire life.
Yeah. I think grace can be a habit for some people, but I think that's the combination of grace and accountability. Yeah. That is hard.
Yeah. And I think that's why it is important to be able to say some of these things out loud. Yeah. Of like, hey, I think of myself as somebody who prays, but I don't always do that all the time. So like, hey, Ross, for the next 40 days, that's my focus.
Sure.
Can you ask me about it on Fridays?
Right. Yeah.
Having the humility to like say to someone else, hey, can you ask me about this thing? Whether that's a spouse, whether that's a good friend, whether like if your child is old enough to engage in that with you, like, hey, Abigail.
Yeah. My daughter's 9 for those of you who don't know.
Yeah. Hey, Abigail, I'm trying to pray more. Can you ask me about that on Sunday mornings? Yeah. Or can you ask me about that just randomly when you think about it? Like a 9-year-old can do that.
For sure. And my 9-year-old would love to.
Like there are some 9-year-olds that would be like, heck yeah, I'm going to do that. Yeah. And like simply by saying it out loud and asking someone else to check in on you is a way to draw that accountability simply from somebody else who cares for you and wants that good for you too. Yeah. And it takes humility to ask for that. But that's my best accountability is when somebody is asking me how that's going, when I've said something out loud and I'm not just, in my head, this is what I'm going to do. Yeah. No, I've said it out loud. I'm making that commitment. This is who I am in my identity. And I know that like, this isn't matching, but I want to be here. And so this is where I want to grow. I'm going to ask someone to hold me accountable to that growth, because doing it one time doesn't make us grow. Watering your plant one time doesn't make it grow for the rest of the month. Yeah. You have to keep watering, keep putting it in sunlight. You have to keep putting it in an environment where it's going to grow. Our souls are the same. We need to be putting ourselves in an environment in the presence of God where God is going to prune and shape and help us to grow to be more like Christ.
I love that we started this conversation talking about preparing and started this conversation talking about how like so much of Lent is about embracing the brokenness of, or the ways in which our faith has natural values to it. And now we're talking about grace, because I think one of the biggest opportunities we get from Lent is an opportunity to experience the full breadth of what it means to follow Jesus. Yeah. Here at Good Shepherd, we have a history of gathering as a community together on Wednesdays during Lent. And this year it looks, we have a couple services where we'll be intentionally setting some time aside to be praying. It's in a Taizé style for those of you who know what that means. And if you don't, I do recommend you Google it. However, where I think we can land the plane here is when you think about folks who are listening, when you think of folks part of this church, folks that you are actively, I'll use this broad of a word possible, those you have influence over, those you are pastoring, those you are walking in your faith with, right? What are you hopeful for folks experience out of Lent this year, given all of the things that we've described?
Mm-hmm. Well, circling, it's like, we circled around Lent just talking about like grace. That's the gift that we receive in Lent. That, using my imagery earlier, it's like that's what shows up for us. Mm-hmm. We don't need grace when everything is good and fine and perfect.
Yeah.
When we don't when we are perfect, there's no need for grace. But grace in and of itself is this incredible gift because it's unearned, undeserved, shows up in surprising ways. And God's grace is limitless. And so I think like my hope always in Lent, in any season of paying attention to the darkness, is a discovery of hope and a discovery of grace. Because we can miss it if we're not paying attention. And that's exactly what Lent is supposed to be. We have 40 days because it models 40 days in the wilderness of the Exodus. It models 40 days in the desert after Jesus' baptism. Like you pull away in a time of hardship and testing. 40 days is that number and symbolism in Scripture that is saying, hey, testing is coming, 40 of something, 40 years, 40 days. You have this kind of alarm that goes off in Scripture that like, hey, testing is coming, trial is coming. Mm-hmm. But it's that testing and that trial that provides that environment for us to be able to grow and become more like who God has intended us to be, whether that's removing distractions so that we can focus on God, or paying attention to the ways our identity doesn't align with who God has made us to be. The environment of 40 days of Lent is meant for us to stop and to pay attention and to recognize that God's grace is ready and available for us to receive if we're willing to pause and turn our attention to Him.
Thank you for listening to the Encounter Faith podcast. This podcast is a service of G. Shep Productions from Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Naperville, Illinois. All rights reserved. If you're in the area, we'd love to meet you on a Sunday morning at our 9 a.m. or 10:45 services. At Good Shepherd, we are inviting everyone to walk together in the calling of Christ for a life of eternal impact. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Ross Cochran. And our theme song is Wake the Earth by 1111 Worship. Thank you for listening. We'll talk again soon.